Hey there, invertebrate zoology. It's a moment you've all been waiting for. It's the lecture on insects. You can think of this video as my version of your favorite 5-minute favorite invertebrate presentations that you have to do for lab, except this one's going to be a lot longer. It's a little behind schedule because I spent way too much time trying to add pictures of all the insect orders because I really wanted to highlight their diversity to you and talk about how cool they are. So that's why it took me a little longer than expected to put it together. Yeah, let's get into it. So, we're not just talking about insects today, though. We're talking about the whole subphylum Hexapoda, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. These are just a few representatives from that subphylum. Only this one down here is an insect. I tried to, as much as possible, use photos from a colleague of mine at UT Austin, who's the curator there, but he's also an amazing insect photographer, and his website's really easy to search for insects by order, so I tried to use his photos as much as possible in this. He's an amazing photographer. When it comes to bees, I also included another one of my favorite nature photographers. That's a colleague of mine. This is Clay Bolt. He made a really great documentary about the Rusty Patch Bumblebee with Neil Lozen, who took this picture of him. I'll share that documentary on Schoology so you can watch it. It's really great. I think my boot is in it for like 30 seconds, so I'll share that with you. Okay, so let's talk about the subphylum Hexapoda as a group. It's the largest subphylum in phylum Arthropoda. The name, hexa means 6, poda means feet, so they all have 6 legs. Most of the animals that are in the subphylum Hexapoda are in the class Insecta. What? The rest that are not within the class Insecta are wingless groups that we think are more ancient than the insects. And within this group, they have 3 body sections. They have the head region, the thorax, and the abdomen. The head has this acron, which is the true head segment, plus 5 more segments. This is also where you're going to find the mouth part appendages. The thorax is the middle part of the body. Here, not so easily visible on the springtail, but here. That has 3 segments, and this is where the leg appendages are attached. So actually it's this and this must be part of the thorax for this Proturan. And then they have the abdomen, which has 11 segments and no appendages on it. So if you see legs attached to a segment, then that is part of the thorax in any hexapod. All of their appendages are uniramous. That means a single branch, so they don't have any branching off like some of the other arthropod groups, which some of are biramous. All these are uniramous. They're split into 2 classes that are not classes as the textbook indicates. I've put classes in quotes here because Antennae, which is what these 3 are in, is not actually a real phylogenetically meaningful group. It's polyphyletic, and if you remember what that word means from our earlier in the semester, that means that it's multiple evolutionary lineages with independent evolutionary origins. They're not all one single evolutionary unit. But your textbook refers to them as the Antennae. And then you have the Ectonae, which are a monophyletic group. So they all have one shared common ancestor. That's the Antennae. The Ectonae. The Antennae, that means jaws inside, ento inside, natha jaws, not insects. Ectonae is jaws outside, and these are insects. So let's talk about the Antennae. This group, they are aterous, which means they have no wings. Pter means wing. You're going to see that word a lot when we go through the insect orders. So think of pterodactyl, that anything with a PTER has wings. These are aterous though, so they are without wings. Like I said, they're a polyphyletic group, so they don't have one single shared common ancestor. And they do appear to be more ancient in evolutionary history than insects. The defining feature of this group is at the base of the mandibles and the maxillae, which are mouth parts, are housed in what's called a nathal pouch. So only the tips of these jaw pieces are visible on the outside of their body, and that's what defines them as entognathous. Another thing that's common amongst them is that if they have antennae, there's a muscle in each segment of the antennae. Insects, on the other hand, only have muscles in the two segments closest to the body of their antennae. The rest don't have muscle attachments in them. For the most part, this group is eyeless, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. Only the columbullans have eyes, these little cuties here, but not even all columbullans have eyes. These are columbullans down here. And there are about 5,000 described species of entognaths. So let's talk about some of the subclasses. One of my favorite entognaths is Columbulas, or the springtails, and we'll talk about in the next slide why they're called that. These are just some really cute photos I found of different springtails from around the world. Here in Pennsylvania, you've probably seen these. These are called Snowflies. Sometimes you'll find them floating on tops of water. There's little tiny blue spots that you'll see on snow or floating on water. These are really common columbulas in the eastern United States. Springtails live in the soil, which is partly why a lot of them don't have eyes, and they're important for soil nutrient cycling, not because they fragment soil particles. So they don't actually eat and digest them, but they break them up while they're trying to eat fungi and microbes that are in the soil particles in the leaf litter. So that in that way, they're really important for nutrient cycling through mechanical fragmentation of soil particles and leaf litter. The carnivorous ones, so not all of them eat fungi and microbes. The carnivorous ones will eat nematodes, rotifers, and some other species of columbullans. And they're reported to be the most abundant macroscopic animals on Earth because they live in most soil as well, and that's macroscopic, not microscopic. They live in most soil, they'll live in moss, they'll live in dead trees, they live in grass, and sometimes they'll live in ant and termite nests. They can also even live in the forest canopy, so you can find them just about everywhere. And if you look really closely, you can see these with your naked eye. Oh, and like I said, some of them are herbivorous, some are omnivorous, some are carnivorous. So, why are they called springtails? Dang, that GIF didn't work. That's okay. Oops. Okay, I'll have to send you a link to a video that shows them. So, this, one of the defining feature of this group is their caulifor, or glue peg. It's called a glue peg because they thought it helped them adhere to surfaces, although it's been shown to not really do that so much. It's probably used for osmoregulation, water intake, and excretion, even though it's called the glue peg. That's the defining feature. Many of them also, though, have a furcula, which is folded under the body and held in place by this retinaculum. And basically, this acts as a spring mechanism that helps them propel off the ground. So if this little video I inserted was working, you'd see this attached to the springtail, and then it builds up that force, and as it's released, it bangs against the surface, and then they go flying through the air. This is one that's in the spring. This one's been released. This one's in the spring mechanism. So here's the retinaculum. This is the furcula, and it can be released to spring them into the air. So that's a really cute thing that they do. Another really cool thing that they're able to do is that they're capable of reducing their size by molting if temperature rises. So temperatures are going to increase their rates of metabolism. Increasing your rate of metabolism is going to increase the nutrient requirements that you need. And if it's too hot and there's not a lot of nutrition, they can just reduce their size so that they need less nutrients, which is a really cool feature, and not a lot of animals can do that, particularly the arthropods that are capable of ecdysis. In terms of reproduction, they have internal fertilization, with an external mating spermatophore. This is just an example of a springtail spermatophore. Some of them lay them on these little stalks with the bead in the end, and then the females will come and collect it. One of the other, we're going to talk about Diplora. They also can sometimes lay these stalked spermatophores. Some of them have really elaborate mating rituals, which are very, very cute, and they look like they're doing a little dance. And I'll share a video with you on Schoology of that from a David Attenborough documentary. So that's the columbullans, or the springtails. Now let's talk about the Diplora. I've always just called them Diplorans, but probably another common name for them is two-pronged bristletails. These are soil-dwelling and live in leaf litter. And the defining feature of this group is that they have a pair of caudal appendages or filaments that are at the end of the body. Diplorans are also soil-dwelling or living in leaf litter, a lot like the columbullans. Actually, all of the Antennae that we're going to talk about are soil-dwelling or live in leaf litter. So again, that's partly why they're probably eyeless. They don't have eyes, and they're unpigmented. If they have any pigments at all, it's usually at this tail end, like you see in this one. In these, they don't have eyes, and they're unpigmented. Some of them will have a little pigment in their cerci, which are these appendages that are coming off the tip of the abdomen. So here they're pincer-like. And then here they're long. They have long antennae with bead-like segments on them that you can see here. That's a really great way to identify them. Their abdomens have these weird eversible vesicles on them that they can stick out to help them absorb water. And the cerci that I was talking about before, that are these appendages that come off the tail, they can be long and filamentous like these ones, or they can be short and have a little pigment and be hardened into pincers. In terms of reproduction, they are also similar to the columbullans in that they'll have external fertilization with, or they'll have, internal fertilization with external mating. So the males will deposit a spermatophore. They also will deposit their spermatophores on the end of a short stalk, and then the females will come up and pick up that sperm package for fertilization internally. Also within the Antennae, you have, it depends on your classification system, the subclass or the order Proturra. These are called Proturns, or coneheads, because they have these pointy little heads. And these actually weren't even discovered until the 20th century. So these are an entire order of hexapods that we didn't even know existed until recently. Again, like the rest of the Antennae, they live in soil, mosses, leaf litter that aren't too acidic. So they do have some soil parameters they need to live within. In culture, if you're trying to raise Proturns in the lab, they'll feed on mycorrhizal fungi, dead mites, and mushroom powder. And they have these styliform mouthparts that kind of stick out. These suggest they feed on fluids. We'll talk about insect mouthparts in a little bit. For the morphology, the defining features of this group are the conehead that I talked about that has two things called pseudoculi. They're a recently discovered group of organisms, and they don't really know what those pseudoculi do. And they have no cerci at the end of the abdomen. So if you were out and looking at arthropods in the soil and you collected something that was unpigmented and didn't have eyes, if it doesn't have cerci, then it might be a Proturn. If it does have cerci, it's probably a Diploran. They're also wingless, like the rest of the groups that we've talked about so far, and they lack any antennae and very limited pigmentation, if any at all. They also have indirect fertilization with a spermatophore that we've talked about so far, so that is internal fertilization with external mating. So, now let's get on to the bestest group, class Insecta, or the Ectonaetha. This is the most diverse and specious animal group on Earth. So that's why they're the bestest. There's more than 1 million described species of insects. And the defining features of this group are that they do not have any abdominal appendages, and they have a presence of a labium that forms the fusion of the second maxillae. So these are all parts of their mouth parts that are defining for the class Insecta. There are 2 orders within here that when we get, your book only goes through, I think, 6 insect orders. I'm going to go through all of them. I'm not going to expect you to know all of them, but I just really want to highlight the diversity. And I'm going to go kind of in like evolutionary order, so going from what we think is the most ancient group of insects to what we think is through to the things that are more recently evolved. The two wingless orders that are also considered the most ancient insect groups are the Archaea Neethu and the Zygentoma, which we're going to talk about in a second. The rest of the insects belong to a subclass called Pterygoda. There's that PTER again, that means that they have wings. So only 2 insect orders are completely wingless. Within the Pterygoda, you do have some species that have lost wings, but that's a loss after they had originally gained wings within the Pterygoda. Oh, and this slide is just some pictures of giant insects. That's me holding a Hercules beetle at the Riverside, before the Riverside Insect Fair in California. That's a giant weta eating a carrot. That's an atlas moth. And then this is Megachile Pluto that Clay Bolt and Eli Wyman rediscovered last year. Yeah, look at that giant bee. Thought it was extinct, and they found out it wasn't. And that's a size relation. That's a honeybee. That's how big this bee is compared to a honeybee. Insects live in nearly every habitat that you can think about, except for the open ocean. You can find, particularly flies, you can find that are living in intertidal zones, but you do not find insects in open ocean water. They can be herbivores, they can be carnivores, they can be parasites, they can be omnivores, they can be scavengers and detritivores. Basically, if you think of any weird thing that could possibly have nutrition, insects have found a way to eat it. And here are some of my favorites. This here is not a vampire moth. This is a moth that is drinking the tears of a sleeping bird. So this is a species of moth that is feeding on the salt solution from tears of birds. These little cocoons here, and you might have seen these around here in Pennsylvania if you have any tomato plants. These are parasitoid wasps. The wasp, and you've probably heard me talk about parasitoids before because I think they're really cool. The females inject their eggs into the caterpillar, and then the larvae eat the caterpillar from the inside out. And these are all the larvae developing as pupa on the outside of the caterpillar. So they'll eat the insides of other insects. And these here, you might be able to guess what these are. These are leafcutter ants that are gardening fungus. So some insects are even gardeners and will grow their own food. And then, of course, some of them drink blood. This is a researcher. This is a photo by Alex Wild of a researcher sacrificing themselves to feed their lab colony of mosquitoes. Yeah, I'm really glad I don't work on mosquitoes. I'm very itchy to them. Okay. So let's talk about some of their mouth parts because, they eat just about anything you can think of, and they've got all these crazy evolutionary adaptations in their mouth parts to eat those different kinds of things. One thing I'm going to ask you on the exam is that if I show you a set of mouth parts and tell you how they work, I'd like you to propose some hypotheses of what you think they might eat based on their mouth part morphology. So expect that to be a question on the exam. Some of them can have biting and chewing mouth parts. This includes cockroaches, grasshoppers, crickets, silverfish, termites, earwigs, beetles. So a lot of things that are eating detritus or plant material will have biting and chewing mouth parts for chewing up those materials. Some hymenopterans and lepidopteran caterpillars can also have biting and chewing mouth parts. You can have chewing and lapping mouth parts. Oh, these are the biting and chewing. So here's an Orthoptera, an example of the biting and chewing mouth parts. Here's an example of chewing and lapping. I am most familiar with these kinds of mouth parts because this is what bees have. They use their mandibles to chew up pollen, and then they'll use their proboscis to suck up and drink nectar. So they will eat solid and liquid foods. So will biting and chewing, but they'll use their mandibles to macerate that food before they eat it. But in the chewing and lapping, they've got two different structures for drinking liquids and chewing up solid food. Yeah, mostly you see these in animals that eat nectar and pollen. Then you can have piercing and sucking mouth parts. Here's a great example from a mosquito. So what they do is their mouth parts have some sort of like lancing stylet or something on their mouth parts that let them tear through the tissue of whatever they're eating and then insert their proboscis and drink out the fluids. This can be an animal like a mosquito that pierces through our skin and drinks our blood, or it could be an animal that feeds on the phloem of plants. I've probably talked about this before. Oh, if you watch my biocontrol video, you know about this. A lot of insects with piercing and sucking mouth parts also will feed on the phloem of plants. As you will know from Gen Bio, because they just covered this, phloem contains the sugars that are being transported throughout the plant, and so it's a very nutritious. Well, it's not highly nutritious. It's actually got very low concentrations of sugar if you're thinking about eating it. But it does have some nutrition, and so some insects will use their piercing mouth parts to pierce into plant tissue and then suck out that phloem and those fluids. So a lot of flies have piercing, sucking mouth parts like mosquitoes, and a lot of the true bugs, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, like things like aphids and mealybugs, they have also piercing, sucking, but they use them on plant tissue rather than animal. And then you can have sponging mouth parts, which they use these. There's an example there. They use these to suck up liquid or semi-liquid food. Houseflies and other flies have these kinds of mouth parts. A lot of things that eat the gross, juicy fluids out of poop will have these kinds of mouth parts. Yeah, there's a lot of species of flies that have these mouth parts. There's also siphoning mouth parts. Perfect example is a butterfly. So these are insects that are drinking flower nectar or fruit juice or other fluids, just water, and very characteristic of butterflies and moths. Yeah, so those are the different types of mouth parts. But some of them, they might actually change the type of mouth parts that they have during development. So a lot of butterflies and moths as caterpillars will have chewing mouth parts, and then they'll have biting and chewing mouth parts, and then as adults they'll have siphoning. So this is more an overview of adult mouth parts that I've talked about here. And you've noticed probably that a lot of the food sources that I've talked about here are plants, and there are a lot of evolutionary hypotheses about the adaptive radiation of insects. Their explosion in species diversity in the fossil record is probably tied to what we think is their coevolution with terrestrial plants and the evolution of flowering plants, the angiosperms. Oh, and I just wanted to point out these gifts that I included. This is a video of a queen bumblebee that I collected and was going to rear in the lab, and she's she's using her tongue to drink some sugar syrup that I'm giving her so that she'll survive transport. She's a thirsty girl. And then this is a moth drinking from a flower at night, mosquito drinking blood. This is a really gross fly drinking some, I don't know, looks like fruit juice or something. And then that's a cute little praying mantis eating a watermelon, but they're omnivorous. They'll also eat animals. So let's talk a little bit more about their morphology, their general morphology. I know a school teacher that taught me a really great song for memorizing all the body parts of an insect, and it goes head, thorax, abdomen, abdomen, head, thorax, abdomen, abdomen, 2 eyes, 2 antennae, and 4 wings. Head, thorax, abdomen, abdomen. So, if you're trying to remember insect body parts, you can use that song to help you. If you didn't want to listen to my song at all, I'll go through it without singing it. So, again, they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They also have compound eyes, 2 compound eyes. That have slightly better vision than the ocelli, which are mostly just for detecting differences in light and dark. These are their ocelli are the simple eyes. These are the compound eyes, and they can have 3. They'll have a various number of ocelli depending on the insect. They'll have 4 pairs of head appendages that are considered mouth parts. So, besides the antennae. So they'll have the antennae, the mandibles, the maxilla, and the labium, which is another part of the mouth parts. And there's that labrum that I talked about before that's kind of like a cover over the mouth parts. The labrum is actually a ventral extension of the head that partially covers the mandibles. And then they'll have all their uniramus appendages on the thorax. That can be walking legs, wings, and on some insects, particularly flies, they'll have these things called halteres. It's these little nubbins that either the first pair, the forewings, or the hindwings have been reduced to. This is a crane fly, not a mosquito, and its hindwings have been reduced to halteres. They kind of like move a little bit and help them with balance while they're flying. This is a really weird group that we're going to talk about later called Strepsiptera that have it reversed, where their hindwings are fully developed wings and their forewings are little nubby halteres. They also have a tracheal system for gas exchange. We've talked about spiracles before in other arthropod groups. They also have spiracles that usually have a thin membrane covering them, but they allow for gas exchange into the body, and then that heads into a more complex system of tracheal tubes so that they can provide oxygen and gas exchange to their tissues. And then they can also close their spiracles to help with desiccation in dry environments. So let's talk a little bit about reproduction. This slide is just kind of showing the diversity of different types of eggs that you can find in insects and where they'll lay their eggs. And they have some different strategies for protecting their fertilized eggs from desiccation. So they can lay them in aquatic environments on top of water, or they can protect them by brooding and exhibiting maternal or paternal care. So bees, social insects do that. Some cutie tree hoppers exhibit parental care. This is a tree hopper protecting her egg sac. His or hers, I don't know. Maybe Brendan will watch this and my friend who's a tree hopper expert and tell us if that's a male or a female. And then sometimes they'll protect them by laying them inside of another animal or inside of a plant. This here is a phorid fly that's called a ant head decapitating fly. So it's going to lay its eggs in this ant. They're going to develop inside the head, make its head fall off, and then the fly will come out of the head. So that's one that lays its eggs inside of another insect. They can also protect them by encasing them in something that protects them from drying out. These are walking stick eggs that have like a thick layer around them that protect them from desiccation or from being eaten. Here's some other different types. So all these are examples of brooding or parental care. This is an ant colony. This is a water bug male that carries around the eggs on its back to protect them as they hatch out. So these are all examples of parental care. This is just an example of a true bug egg that's kind of got an interesting structure that probably helps prevent the eggs from being eaten or from drying out. These are lacewing eggs. These are some other true bug eggs. There's a really huge diversity in egg morphology and egg laying strategies in insects. Let's talk a little bit about their development. There are 3 main development modes that I'd like you to know and are in insects. The first is ametabolous development. Basically, these insects just look the same and they just grow in size through successive molts or ecdysis. Bristletails and silverfish, those more ancient lineages that I talked about, they exhibit this ametabolous development. You can also have hemimetabolous development. This is when the larval stages look similar to the adult body plan, but they don't go through major metamorphosis. That's why it's hemi-half change, hemimetabolous. In this type of development, the larval stages are referred to as nymphs, so they go from an egg to a nymph to an adult. This is a cockroach here. True bugs, the Hymenoptera do this. The Orthoptera, the grasshoppers, praying mantises, cockroaches, termites, earwigs, dragonflies, and damselflies, which you should know from Gen Bio from collecting the nymphs of these. Stick insects also do this, so do lice and mayflies, stoneflies, ice crawlers, which we're going to talk about. That's a real thing. And then you have holometabolous development, which is complete change. So this is a stage in which the larva stage is very different than the adult body plan, and they go through a major metamorphosis into the adult. In here they'll have an egg, and then they'll have several larval stages, which are called instars. They'll then develop a pupal casing, which is when all this cellular reorganization is happening, and then they will become an adult. The adult status is reached at sexual maturity in holometabolous insects, and within the larva, you can see things called imaginal discs. This is an illustration of imaginal discs in Drosophila, showing what each of these little cell buds is eventually going to develop into in the adult. And these are activated during the pupal stage so that you can have that complete metamorphosis within this pupal casing. The insects that exhibit holometabolous development include the beetles, the flies, the Hymenoptera, the butterflies and moths, scorpion flies, alder flies, lacewings, snakeflies, fleas, Strepsiptera, and Trichoptera. A bunch of stuff we're going to talk about in a second. And that's just some of them. So let's look at some bugs. I understand why your textbook is meant to be a broad coverage of all invertebrates. I understand why they only included the big four, which are Lepidoptera, Coleoptera, Hymenoptera, and Diptera. But I want to introduce you to all my friends because I think there is beauty and amazing evolutionary novelty in every group. And so for the exam, what I would like you to do is kind of listen to me, give a long love letter about insects, and pick which of these, recall for me on the exam, which of the two things that I cover you think are the most interesting. So pick two orders that we're going to go through, and you tell me what you think is the most interesting thing about those orders. So let me share some facts and love with you about insects. Also, another thing, I'm okay calling insects bugs. Some entomologists are nitpicky because bugs specifically refer to Hemiptera. I'm not that picky. Y'all know I ain't. So I call it all insects bugs. Okay, let's start. We're going to go with the roughly in order from the most primitive to the most ancient to the most recent in evolutionary time. So we're going to start with the Archaea Neethu, which are the jumping bristletales. These are just some pictures of them. I've tried to include a wide diversity. They're very similar looking. Not a lot of morphological diversity here. These are the jumping bristletales. You've probably seen these in your house. They are often confused with the other primitive order, which are the Zygentoma, which are the silverfish or the fire brats. They're called silverfish because they have a silvery appearance, and they do look very similar to the Archaea Neethu. This is just some of the diversity. They can sort of kind of be pests in your house. They'll eat like the cellulose and the glue binding in books, but really they're not going to do a lot of damage unless you have like a major infestation. And then we have the dragonflies, or order Odonata. You hopefully saw some of their nymphal stages in Gen Bio when you went collecting for macroinvertebrates in streams. This is a dragonfly. These are dragonflies. These are damselflies. Damselflies lay their wings over their back like this, and dragonflies land with their wings out like this. That's how you tell them apart. They're really cool predators. They'll have really cool mating strategies, and they're really beautiful. You've probably seen these around. Okay, the next order are the Mayflies. This is a logo I found online. Their motto is live fast, die young. The adults of Mayflies don't even have mouth parts because they usually only live about 24 hours, and literally their only job is to find a mate and reproduce and lay eggs. And they will come out in huge, massive numbers in some places. Hopefully you've also seen some nymphs of Mayflies in the streams around Pennsylvania. This is what they look like. This is what they look like as adults. Now there's the earwigs. Some people get creeped out by earwigs, but I think they're very cute and they're good parents. Some of them exhibit brood care and they'll take care of their young as they're developing. I know there's some that people keep as pets that will take care of their young. These you can identify by the pincers that they have on the end of their abdomens. These really aren't used for defense so much as for courtship. This is a really large, this was at one point the largest species of earwig. It's now extinct. It's called the St. Helena earwig, I think. Maybe, can't remember. Anyway, here's some earwigs. I think they're cute. And don't worry, they don't actually go in your ears either. That's an old wives' tale, and they don't really pinch you with those pincers. Then we have the Zoroptera. They don't really have a common name, but these are called angel insects. They live in dead wood, leaf litter, soil. They're very transparent and hard to find, and they kind of look like diplurans, except diplurans have those cerci. So if you find a little cutie like this with bead-like antennae, you can tell if it's a dipluran or a Zoropteran by whether or not it has cerci at the end of its abdomen. Then we have the Stoneflies. You've probably seen these in Gen Bio as well because they are important aquatic invertebrates. This is their nymphal stage that's aquatic, and then their terrestrial flying adults. And you can see a lot of these out now. They're one of the first insects that come out in the spring. They can still come out when the snow's on the ground. And these are in the water all year long, but they may be overwintering. Now this is one that you probably have never heard of. These are really cool insects called web spinners. They can be invasive because they burrow into the soil and then they make this silk that they use to line the tunnel cavities of the tunnel chambers that they live in. So this is all silken cavities that they've made themselves. I think they're cool because they have these like little tough guy arms that are swollen in their legs, so they look like they're like bodybuilding insects. And they make these really cool silken tunnels, but they can be invasive in some places where they live. And then there's walking sticks, the Phasmatodea. This is just a few examples of their morphological diversity. These are herbivorous insects, and they hide from predators through crypsis, so they pretend to be a stick. Some of them will even like kind of wave around in the wind to try to trick you. Like this one's obviously mimicking a stick. Some of them will mimic leaves through crypsis. So this is a leaf-footed or a leaf mimicking stick insect. Some of them just kind of blend into the color of their host plant. They're cool. They're fun pets. And then we have the Orthoptera. This includes grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids, and I included some of my favorites here. Here's a giant weta again, so they can get really big. This is a tiny little cricket that is a kleptoparasite of ant colonies, so it tricks ants into feeding it and lives inside ant colonies, and it's so cute. Look at it. This is a a Orthopteran that has a really weird head. Sometimes these are called cone heads. Actually, this might be different than cone heads, but look at this cutie. This is a Jerusalem cricket. Some people think these are gross. I think they're really cute because they have these cute little heads. This is a katydid that is a lichen mimic, so all of these projections and all of the model colors that you see on this insect, it usually feeds on lichen and it's trying to blend in with its host plant, or fungus slash plant slash algae. And then this is a pink katydid. This is one species of katydid that has a pink and a green morph, and I just think it's really pretty. And then we have these ones you've probably never heard of. These are the Mantophasmatodia. They're called gladiators. They look a little bit like grasshoppers. These were recently discovered group of insects. This is just a few examples of these gladiators. There's also ice crawlers. The Grilloblattids, some people will place them phylogenetically into the same order as Nototera with the Mantophasmatodia. These are really cool because they live on the ice. So you can see all these pictures that were taken of Grilloblattids living on the ice. That's why they're called ice crawlers. And they, again, look very similar in morphology to the Mantophasmatodia. And then we have the actual Mantodia. These are the mantises, the praying mantises. This here is a pair of Chinese mantids. They're non-native to Pennsylvania. Non-native species that's really common around here. Here's a really beautiful iridescent species that I found on the internet. You can buy 10 of these for $1,000. They're very expensive animals in the pet trade. This is an orchid mantid. This is another species of orchid mantid. This I think is a Carolina mantid. This is a native species to Pennsylvania. And then we have the cockroaches, the Blatodia. A lot of people are grossed out by cockroaches. Honestly, I'm not. I don't have a lot of phobias, but I am admittedly creeped out by American cockroaches. This is an oriental cockroach. These are common pests in houses. But I wanted to show you that cockroaches can be beautiful too. Look at these beautiful different color patterns that cockroaches have. This is a domino cockroach that you can buy as a pet, actually. They make good pets too. They just eat dog food and veggie scraps. There's also the termites, which have recently been placed into the order Blatodia. It turns out termites are just kind of fancy social cockroaches. These are just a few different species of termites that Alex Wild took these pictures of. Termites are social. These are a few different castes that you can find within. These are different divisions of labor within a termite colony. Sometimes they'll have winged mating individuals, and then they can also make these really cool structures that are great examples of thermal design because they're oriented to the sun. And then we have thrips. These you've probably never seen before, but if you kind of like look in, I find them very commonly in roses. So if you like look around rose petals or a rose plant you might have around your house, you might find these. They have these really strange feathery wings that are really characteristic of the group, and they have these mouth parts that kind of slice up tissue, and then they feed on the fluids, so they can be pests of plants. Then we have the true bugs. I told you all this in class before we were closed on campus. My friend Brendan Morris, who's a tree hopper expert, just described this brand new species called Kaikaya gaga that he named after Lady Gaga. Tree hoppers are probably my favorite of the true bugs. This is that one, again, exhibiting parental care over their eggs, and they have these really crazy morphologies. It's thought that in a lot of them they're mimicking thorns on plants to aid in crypsis from predators. These are some other examples of true bugs. This is a 17-year periodical cicada, which you can sometimes see here in Pennsylvania. Those are true bugs. This is called a peanut-headed bug. I think these are really cool. They're not from around here. And then, of course, something that's going to come to western Pennsylvania soon, this is the spotted lanternfly. If you see any of these in your yard, you should kill them and squash them and get rid of them because they're really invasive and going to be a big problem very soon for western Pennsylvania. So squash them. Then we've got the lice. When you think of lice, you probably think of these, the kind that live on humans, crab lice, body lice, head lice. But there's lots of different kinds of lice. There's bark lice, which are really, really cute. These are two species of bark lice. This is called a book louse. Sometimes you can find these if you have old books in your house. They'll eat the cellulose and some of the glue that's used in binding books, just like those silverfish. And then there's some species, there's a lot of diversity of feather lice. This is a bird louse. These are just, this was an experiment looking at artificial selection in a species of bird louse in doves that I found. So there's actually quite a diversity of lice, and not all of them are gross. Some of them are very cute. And then, of course, my favorite order, the Hymenoptera, and of course, this is a very bee-biased slide. These are all pictures taken by Clay Bolt. This is the endangered rusty patch bumblebee. These are some other species of bees that I've already talked about. But this also includes, I don't want to be very bee-biased, but this also includes things like sawflies that will saw into wood with their ovipositor and lay their eggs in it. It also includes wasps. This is a wasp that's injecting its eggs. This is a parasitic wasp injecting its eggs into an aphid. It also includes really cool things like velvet ants, which actually aren't ants. They're more like wingless wasps. Don't touch them. Their stings hurt a lot. But they can be really fuzzy and cute. And then this is just an example of a fungal farm inside of an ant colony. Ants are included in that group as well. There's also the Hymenoptera. Those are the fleas. This is just an image I took from a paper looking at flea diversity. This first one is a flea that feeds on humans and mammals. B, right here, this is a flea of infamy. This is the rat flea, Xenoscilla chiopus. Xenoscilla chiopus. You know I can't pronounce stuff. This is the one that caused the plague. It would spread Yersinia pestis from rats to humans by biting them. Bad guy. Another one that's in here, this is a bat flea. This is just an example of the different types of diversity you can have in fleas. And then there's scorpion flies and hanging flies. Even though they have fly in their name, they are not true flies. They're their own group, and you can kind of tell by the shape of their head and the antennae that they have. A lot of them have this really weird thing where the males will make like a ball of dead insects and stuff and present it as a nuptial gift to the females. And if the females like the nuptial gift, they'll mate with them. These are some wingless ones that are sharing a nuptial gift. These are some winged ones. Not all of them. So this is like kind of one morphology type for the hanging flies. But you can also have scorpion flies. Some of them will crawl around on snow. This is one of those. And you can actually find these in Pennsylvania. Jake Bender caught a scorpion fly in ecology last semester out at Winnie Palmer. And they have this little scorpion-like tail and then this long head. And then that brings us to the true flies. This is a really, really diverse group of insects. They have caused more deaths on Earth than world wars because of the spread of malaria and other insect-borne diseases that are spread by mosquitoes. But they can be beautiful and have interesting behaviors too. So this is not a bee. That's a hoverfly. There are a lot of hoverfly species. Both these fly species, but this hoverfly in particular that mimic bees so that predators don't eat them. This is a predatory fly called a robber fly that's eating a honeybee. So this is a honeybee. That's a fly. Some of them are very delicate and beautiful. This is a fungus gnat. These are two apple maggot flies that are engaging in some sort of like dancing behavior. This is a stalk-eyed fly. Some of them have these crazy eyeballs on stalks. This is one of my favorites, just because it's really gross. This is a human botfly, so that's the adult. The larvae are the ones that burrow into your skin and eat your muscles. And then this is a crazy wingless fly called a hippobossid that is living on a bat. Poor thing, it's as big as its face, but that's a fly. And then there's order Lepidoptera. This is, again, another really diverse group of insects. This includes butterflies and moths. This is a vampire moth that is drinking blood out of someone's finger with its knifey proboscis. This is a monarch butterfly. Hopefully y'all recognize that. This is a caterpillar of the flannel moth. You do not want to touch these. They will hurt you a lot. This is a Cecropia moth. Some of the caterpillars have these really awesome mimicry systems. This is a caterpillar that's mimicking a snake to ward off predators. This is a really cool... Mostly, I just put pictures of my favorite insects in here. This is a hickory horned devil. I've never seen one in person, but one day I'm going to see one alive. This is a butterfly that's mimicking a dead leaf to avoid predation. And then this is a moth that's mimicking the eyes of an owl to avoid predation. We've also got the order Trichoptera. These are the Caddisflies. You should also be familiar with these from Gen Bio. As larvae, or as nymphs, as larvae, they'll build these really cool cases around them. They can. Some are free living, some are case building. Here's one that made one out of snails, sticks, rocks. And then these are what the adults look like. Then we have the order Neuroptera, which you may not be super familiar with. This includes lacewings, mantis flies, and antlions. This is a mantis fly. No, it's not a praying mantis. It's its own separate order called mantis flies. It's just this crazy convergent evolution on these raptorial forelegs for catching prey, and these really big eyes for eyesight. It's like a very strong selection for this predator phenotype in the mantis flies. And then it also includes antlions, which are really, really cool. If you think of like the sandworm in Star Wars, antlions are kind of like that. They dig these pits as larvae, and they lay inside the bottom of them with their mouth sticking out, and as ants fall into the pit to their doom, these mandibles catch them and pull them down into the ground. This is a lacewing larva. They all have these large predator jaws as larvae. This is actually an antlion adult, so they're very cute as adults, but very vicious as larvae. And then these are just some other adult versions, adult neuropterans. There's also the Reproduction, which are the snakeflies. These are not very common and not super diverse, and they're called that because they have this kind of snake head with a really long, extended thorax section. These are the snakeflies, and they have wings that are similar in morphology to the neuropterans. Then there's the Megalapras. You probably are familiar with these in Pennsylvania as the Helgramite larvae. These are the alderflies, Dobson flies, and fish flies. And as adults, they can have these really cool mandibles. They don't really use these for defense, but more for mating. Yeah, they can have these really, really cool long jaws as adults. This is a Helgramite larvae, so cool predators as larvae too. And then there's the beetles, the super diverse group, one of my favorite groups. I didn't actually even include a picture of my favorite beetle on here. Fireflies are in this group, some of them bioluminesce. This is a firefly larvae, if you've never seen that. Sometimes they're called trilobite larvae because of these plates they have, and they have the three ridge sections, like the trilobite that we talked about. This is a whirligig beetle. This is an aquatic beetle that has eyes on top and below, so it can see under the water and above the water while it's in the water. This is just a selection of some beetle diversity that Alex Wild took a picture of. This is a blister beetle where, when they're attacked, they'll reflex bleed this oil that can give you blisters. If you've ever heard of Spanish fly, which is like this old wives' tale of an aphrodisiac, it comes from a blister beetle. This is a small hive beetle. They're a terrible pest of honeybee hives. This is a scarab beetle. A lot of beetles feed on decaying matter and poop, and so they're important for nutrient cycling. These are some orthophagous horned beetles that, if you've taken ecology with me, you've heard me talk about. So this is just some diversity in the beetles. And then that brings us to the last group we're going to talk about, which are really weird. These are the Strepsiptera. They're twisted wing parasites. We think that they have evolved from a lineage of Coleoptera, and they are really, really strange. So the females are basically these weird little blobs that don't have a lot of defining features. That's like the genital end of the females. They're basically just these discs that are inside of wasps and flies and other insects, and their genitalia of the females basically stick out so that the males can then come up to them. That the males are winged and will fly around, and then they can mate with these blob females inside of the wasp. That's one mating with the blob female. And then when they reproduce, this is one coming out of a wasp butt. And they have these really, really strange compound eyes too. They also have these, they're called Strepsiptera because they have these twisted wings. And like I said before, they have whole tears in the forewings instead of the hind wings. They're just really, really weird, cool parasites. And that's the end. That is obviously our longest lecture so far. You probably expected that because you know how much I love insects. Yeah, that's the end. These are some illustrations I drew of my favorite insects. That's Bombus ephipiatus, the species I studied for my master's and my PhD dissertation. And then this is Cicindela sexcutata, the green tiger beetle. You can find these here in Pennsylvania, but I worked on tiger beetles for my undergraduate research thesis. So that's it for insects. See you next time in the next video. Bye-bye.